Prince Harry and Meghan Markle just had a secret meeting with King Charles. And no, it wasn't the warm family reunion the headlines are trying to sell you. Because here's what actually happened behind those Highgrove gates. Charles, Camilla, Harry, Meghan, and their 2 children all in one room for the first time in years, and the palace wanted you to believe this was healing. Warm, fuzzy, a grandfather finally getting to know his grandchildren properly. But strip away the PR framing and look at how this meeting was actually handled. Extreme secrecy around every arrival and every departure. Nobody saw them come in. Nobody saw them leave. If this was really about family, about warmth, about reconnection, why does it look more like a hostage exchange than a reunion? Because it wasn't a reunion. It was risk management. And once you understand that, everything else about this moment starts to make a lot more sense. This wasn't 2 parents letting their guard down with their son. This was an institution, the monarchy, deciding how much exposure it could tolerate. Every second of that meeting was controlled because every second of contact with Harry and Meghan now comes with risk attached. Risk to the king's image, risk to William's future reign, risk of the tabloids twisting one candid photo into 1,000 headlines so they didn't let their guard down. They managed the moment. And that distinction matters because it tells you everything about where this relationship actually stands. So if it wasn't a reconciliation, what was it? This is where it gets interesting because insiders are now calling this the start of something new, something people are referring to as the Highgrove Accord. Think of it as an update, a rewrite, because you'll remember back when the Sussexes first stepped back from royal duties, there was something called the Sandringham Agreement, and Harry himself later complained that it was rushed through, thrown together in a matter of hours, without him having the time or the space to really understand what he was signing away. Well, this time, Charles isn't rushing anything. The Highgrove Accord isn't a public document. Nobody's released the terms, but the signs all point to one thing. This is Charles laying down explicit boundaries, not warmth, not reconciliation, boundaries. What does contact look like going forward? What gets said publicly and what stays private? What Harry and Meghan are and aren't allowed to bring to the table when they show up? Because the king has learned his lesson. He's not going to let another agreement get made on the fly, only to have Harry come back later and say it wasn't fair, it wasn't clear, it was forced on him. This time, the rules are being set in advance, quietly, deliberately, and that alone tells you Charles isn't interested in a big public thaw. He's interested in control. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets genuinely difficult for the king, because whichever way Charles moves here, he loses something. If he strips Harry and Meghan of their titles, if he goes hard, if he cuts them off completely, what does that do? It hands Harry exactly the ammunition he wants. It feeds directly into the grievance narrative Harry has been building for years now. The narrative where he's the outcast son, pushed out by a cold institution, forced to build a life outside the family that never wanted him in the first place. Strip the titles and Harry gets to go right back on a podcast, right back into another interview and say, see, I told you so. But if Charles goes the other way, if he's too soft, if he lets Harry and Meghan back in without real consequences for everything that's been said and published over the past few years, that creates a different problem entirely, because it's not really Charles who inherits that decision long term. It's William, it's Catherine. They're the ones who will have to manage a Sussex relationship that was never actually resolved, just quietly papered over for the rest of their reign. So Charles is stuck. Damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. And the Highgrove Accord, whatever it actually contains, is his attempt to thread a needle that might not have a workable middle ground at all. And if this feels familiar, if it feels like we've watched a version of this story before, that's because we have. Because there's a name that keeps coming up when royal insiders talk about Harry's situation. And it's not a comparison Harry is going to like. Prince Andrew. Think about the pattern for a second. Both men had genuinely strong military careers. Andrew flew helicopters during the Falklands War. Harry did 2 tours in Afghanistan and was widely respected for it. Inside the structure of the military, they both thrived. They had purpose, they had a clear role, they had a chain of command that told them exactly what mattered and exactly how to succeed at it, and then they came home. And that structure disappeared. Both men struggled to find anything resembling that same sense of purpose in civilian royal life. No clear job, no defined lane, just a vague sense of being a working royal without any of the built-in structure that made the military work for them in the first place. And over time, both became what insiders call loose cogs, figures with a title and a platform, but no real mechanism keeping them productively plugged into the institution. For Andrew, we know how that story played out, and it's not exactly a cautionary tale anyone in the palace once repeated, which is exactly why royal watchers say this pattern matters way beyond just Harry. Because look at who's coming up behind him. Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis. Neither of them will be first in line. Neither of them will carry the same built-in purpose that comes with being the future monarch. They're going to grow up as the spares of their generation, just like Harry did. And the lesson the the institution seems to be taking from the Andrew and Harry situations is this: you cannot wait until adulthood to figure out what a spare's role is supposed to be. That vacuum, if left unfilled, doesn't stay empty. It gets filled with resentment, with grievance, with a sense of being unimportant, which is, by nearly every account, exactly how Harry got to where he is today. So that's the historical parallel hanging over this whole situation, but it's not actually the most urgent problem on Harry's plate right now. Because while all of this palace maneuvering is happening quietly behind closed gates, there's a much louder, much more dangerous fight playing out in a courtroom. Harry's ongoing legal battle against the Daily Mail's publisher, Associated Newspapers, has reached what people close to the case are calling a genuinely critical moment. A ruling on damages and legal costs is expected on July 29th, and depending on how that ruling goes, Harry could be looking at a bill running into the tens of millions of dollars. Now here's where Harry may have made things significantly worse for himself. Right as this judge is preparing to rule on damages, Harry publicly accused Justice Nicklin of running what he called a whitewash. Think about the timing of that for a second. You are waiting on a ruling from a judge about how much money you owe, and your move right before that ruling comes down is to publicly imply that judge is corrupt or biased. Legal experts are calling this exactly what it looks like: a poor decision made at possibly the worst possible moment. And it gets worse from there, because the Daily Mail's legal team isn't just fighting the substance of the case anymore. Reports suggest they're going for the jugular, meaning they're now focused heavily on Harry's own conduct throughout the trial. There are already claims on record from other witnesses in the case that the judge himself described as almost deceitful and dishonest. That's not language you want attached to your own legal strategy. And there's a financial danger lurking underneath all of this that goes beyond just the court case itself. Insurance, because normally in cases like this, insurance helps cover massive legal costs. But reports now suggest insurers may actually refuse to pay out here, partly because the case, in their view, never should have gone to court in the first place, and partly because Harry's own conduct on the stand has been described as unbecoming. If insurers walk away, Harry isn't just facing a large bill. He's facing it with no financial cushion at all. And on top of the Mail case specifically, there's supposedly evidence sitting in reserve, reportedly 20 years worth of messages and notes that the Mail's team believes seriously undermines the credibility of Harry's key witness in this case. 20 years. That's not a minor inconsistency. That's a paper trail. So you put all of that together and you start to see why this moment matters so much, because this isn't just a lawsuit. It's a financial cliff edge, and it's arriving at the exact same time Harry is trying to quietly rebuild his relationship with the family that could, in theory, offer him some stability if everything else collapses. Which brings us to the deeper problem sitting underneath all of it, the actual math of Harry and Meghan's finances, and why money out has quietly started outpacing money in. Because wealth on paper doesn't mean much if the outflow keeps beating the inflow. And that's reportedly exactly the position Harry and Meghan are in right now. Their money out in security costs, the Montecito lifestyle, the day-to-day expense of maintaining a brand that still has to look successful from the outside remains extremely high. Meanwhile, their money in tells a different story. Several of their business ventures have stalled. Deals that were supposed to define their post-royal independence haven't delivered the way they were pitched. That gap is exactly why insiders are now describing this whole palace outreach as something with a name attached to it: Project Thaw. Not a spontaneous family reconciliation, but a calculated attempt to rehabilitate a brand that's losing value fast. Because underneath all of it, there's one asset Harry and Meghan have that nothing else in their business portfolio can replace: proximity to royalty. And right now, that asset is depreciating. You can see it in the numbers. Their popularity in the UK has reportedly hit a 33-year low. And in the United States, the market that was supposed to be their fresh start, their new home turf, the sympathy is fading too. Americans are starting to see Harry differently, not as a sympathetic figure who escaped a cold institution, but increasingly, as in the words of one commentator, a posh fellow who ran away from his problems and now wants to run back to daddy the moment things get difficult. That line lands hard because it taps into something very specific about American values. The idea that you're supposed to earn your success, not have it handed to you by birthright, and definitely not go crawling back to family money the second independence gets tough. And here's the trap in that perception. If Harry and Meghan do end up returning to the UK in any real capacity, that return itself risks being read as a confession, a failure flight, an admission that the California experiment, the podcasts, the Netflix deals, the actual brand launches never actually replaced what they walked away from. So what's actually left for them to work with? This is where it gets clear just how much their whole strategy depends on one single lever, because Harry has already been largely largely excised from Invictus, the charity most associated with his public identity. Meghan's as ever brand has seen interest rise and fall unevenly, never quite becoming the reliable engine they need, which means the most valuable thing left in their portfolio isn't a product or a deal. Its access, proximity to the crown, quite literally, is the business now. And that's exactly why Meghan's recent silence matters so much. She's been unusually quiet for weeks, no major public moments, no big announcements, and that silence isn't nothing, it's strategy. A pause while they wait to see how the Daily Mail damages ruling lands, a period of watching before making the next big move, possibly even preparation for something involving her trademarks and business interests once the legal picture clears up. There's one more piece of pressure pushing them toward the palace, and it has nothing to do with brand strategy at all. Archie and Lilibet are reaching school age, and there's growing speculation that Harry and Meghan are considering English schools for their children. If that happens, it's not a small logistical decision. It would require a far more permanent kind of reconciliation and a real solution to how their security is funded, since UK security costs for the family have been one of the most contentious issues since they first stepped back, which brings everything to a single point on the calendar. September, Harry is scheduled to return for the Well Child Awards, and royal watchers are already calling it his real credibility test. Can he show up, do the work, and leave without reviving old grievances in the process? Because the timing here is almost impossible to ignore. His visit lands right around the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's death on September 8th, the same window the rest of the royal family traditionally spends at Balmoral, quietly honoring her memory. If Harry's presence pulls attention away from that moment, even by accident, it could undo whatever goodwill the Highgrove meeting was meant to build. So watch September closely, because whatever happens at Well Child, whatever tone Harry strikes, and whatever King Charles decides to do next, that's when we'll find out if the Highgrove Accord was really the start of something new, or just one more quiet, controlled photo op with nothing behind it. If you want to understand exactly how this plays out, make sure you're subscribed, because this story is far from over.